Good evening. Thank you for joining the visioning discussion for the Tacoma Tideflats Subarea Plan with the focus on the environment and health for this evening's meeting. I'm Marcy Wagner, a member of the consultant team, and I will be moderating tonight's session. Yesterday's discussion was focused on land use and economic development. Tonight, as just mentioned, will be environment and health, and Saturday's panel will be on transportation and infrastructure. As a reminder, this meeting will also be recorded and posted to the city's YouTube channel. Before we begin, this land recognition was developed in collaboration with tribal staff. Let us acknowledge that this project is being conducted by the historical and current homelands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, and gathered in the Tacoma Tideflats, and they retain these rights to this day. Let us take this moment to recognize the unique responsibility in being co-stewards with the tribe over these lands and waters and work with them to safeguard their tree-protected rights. In a few moments, we'll invite the panelists to introduce themselves. Then we'll hear a project overview by a member of the project management team, followed by our panel discussions. After each panel discussion, we will invite our audience to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. We also have an online survey available at cityoftacoma.org/tideflats that you see listed here on the slide, if you'd like to share your thoughts that way as well. The project management team for the Tacoma Tideflats Subarea Plan is composed of representatives from each of the participating agencies and the Puyallup tribe. The representatives are listed on the slide: Steve Atkinson, City of Tacoma; Steve Friddle, City of Fife; Sean Gaffney, Pierce County; Andrew Strobel for the Puyallup Tribe of Indians; and Deirdre Wilson, Port of Tacoma. Deirdre Wilson is the Senior Planning Manager for the Port of Tacoma, and she will be providing the project overview presentation this evening. The consultant team includes myself, Rebecca Fornaby, Deborah Monkberg, who is the consultant team lead, and Radhika Nair. Deborah and Radhika will also be assisting with the questions from the audience later this evening. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating in this evening's discussion about the vision for the Tideflats future. I'll now invite the panelists to introduce themselves and their organization, starting with Jason Jordan.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see me. My name is Jason Jordan, and first of all, thank you to the city and to the project management team that put this together. It's a real honor to be here tonight to talk about this vision and to talk about the Port of Tacoma and how it fits into this vision. I'm actually really excited to be a part of this, and it's a great panel too. I know both Shar and Melissa, and it's a great panel, and I'm anxious to hear their perspectives. Anyway, my introduction is I'm Jason Jordan. I'm the Director of Environmental and Planning Services for the Port of Tacoma.
Thank you, Jason. Shar.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shar Naylor. I'm a Water Quality Manager and Assistant Fisheries Director for the Puyallup tribe. I've worked for the tribe for a very long time now, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion tonight, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Melissa Malott.
Yep. Thank you, Martha. Thank you for having me, and citizens for Healthy Bay here tonight. I'm Melissa Malott. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for a Healthy Bay. We've been working in Tacoma since 1990 to help clean up the tide flats and contaminated places in the tide flats to prevent pollution and to protect things into the future. So I'm excited to talk about this tonight and excited to see what comes out of this process.
Excellent, thank you. And now we will hear from Deirdre Wilson with an overview about the project. Deirdre.
Good evening. Thank you, Marcy. The Tideflats subarea, as you see on the map here, this map shows the designation of the manufacturing industrial center that we have in Tacoma. It's about 5,000 acres, including rights of way and waterways. The natural context is that it includes a shoreline, river deltas, tidal creeks, marshes, naturalized creeks, and a river channel corridor. The economic context is that over 10,000 employees, including a world-class port with industrial manufacturing and maritime activity, exists in the Tideflats. And I will just say that that also contributes to about 40,000 jobs in the region. The cultural context is that we're within the Puyallup tribe survey boundary. The goals of this project is that we have a partnership with 5 different governments: the City of Tacoma, Port of Tacoma, Puyallup Tribe of Indians, Pierce County, and the City of Fife. That partnership was solidified with an intergovernmental agreement and following work plan that was approved by the 5 governments. This is a coordinated approach to development, environmental review, and strategic capital investments for the future. What's on the table? We're looking at how do we maintain a thriving port in the face of global competition and future impacts of climate change? How can we improve the overall health of the Tideflats, Commencement Bay, and Commencement Bay while preserving and expanding our employment base and available jobs? How can we better align public and private interests and leverage resources to coordinate infrastructure investments in the area? And how can we ensure a healthy, plentiful salmon and shellfish in a complex urban environment? And then lastly, how can we ensure a safe environment for workers and residents? So where are we in this process? If you have been with this process as long as I have, which I began with working with this in 2017, you'll see that that is not on the timeline here. So your timeline that you're looking at here is actually the process since we engaged work with the consultants who are helping us today. And that was earlier this last year. So while this process started a few years ago to make this happen, the actual work with consultants to prepare a draft plan to be considered by the City of Tacoma, we're right at the beginning of that process now and expect that that will take until sometime early to mid 2023. So we're in the kickoff session here in the beginning of 2021, and we're doing visioning sessions, and EIS, or the environmental scoping, is what will be the next step after we get through our visioning. The planning framework that is fairly complicated in Washington state, and I suppose probably in all urban areas. We have the Puyallup tribe, where we have a treaty and also a land claim settlement that affects the Tideflats. The state of Washington has the Growth Management Act as well as the Shoreline Management Act. The Port of Tacoma has its own strategic plan as well as obligation to a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. Regionally, we have the Puget Sound Regional Council, who recently updated its regional planning framework for this region, which includes Pierce County, Vision 2050. And then at the county level, we have countywide planning policies. And at the culmination of this subarea planning process, the subarea plan for the Tideflats will be incorporated into the City of Tacoma's comprehensive plan as a new chapter. So the next few sections of slides relate to different environmental potential areas of coverage for the sub-area plan. And I won't be going into detail on each one of these. We do have great panelists here tonight that can help inform in these areas much better than I. I'm not a subject matter expert like they are. So for air quality, the historic air quality issues largely revolve around particulate matter in the Tideflats area. And actions are being taken in the Tideflats, such as reducing residential wood smoke, reducing diesel emissions, and we have a clean truck program, as well as we participate in Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy with Vancouver and other ports on the West Coast. Existing plans are expected to lead to continued attainment, which we do have from records from Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And that's captured here also in 2019 without the influence of wildfires. Ambient air in Tideflats met both the national ambient air quality standards and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency health goal target. Greenhouse gas emissions do not benefit from the same regulatory history as criteria air pollutants. The area has taken numerous steps to categorize and reduce GHG emissions and begin resiliency and adaptation planning, as you can see by these examples that are shown here. And I will say, at least one of my goals as a planner for the Port of Tacoma is that these planning efforts can be more coordinated in the future moving forward. And so it's great that we all have kind of individually at different agency levels been working on what to do about this issue. I'm hopeful that our approach moving forward will be more coordinated and that this sub-area planning process will help with that. Fish, shellfish, and aquatic vegetation are surprisingly abundant, but that's because the Tideflats is located on a shoreline. The Chinook salmon are most dependent on habitats in the estuary and marine near shore. Juveniles stay in shallow shoreline habitats, then move to deeper water when they are bigger. And in more developed areas, shoreline corridors that allow light to reach the water is better for the fish. Puget Sound supports many species and types of shellfish, including crabs, bivalves, and shrimp. Shellfish resources are important resources for the tribe. Crab and shrimp are harvested by tribe and recreational users, and harvest of geoduck and other bivalves is prohibited by WDOH, Washington Department of Health, throughout waterways and the bay. The key findings are that habitat for plants and animals is very limited. City, tribe, and port managed habitat mitigation sites do provide substantial habitat given the industrial nature of the area. And restoration activities should continue to be expanded that have already largely been initiated. Important location for andronymous fish and shellfish connected to Puyallup tribal fisheries restoration and management, and marine biotoxins and pollution limit ability to harvest some resources. As far as climate vulnerability assessment, the questions that are being asked in this process is, what are the hazards associated with climate for Tacoma Tideflats? What magnitudes of climate hazards matter for the Tacoma Tideflats? What resources and infrastructure are at risk under different hazard scenarios? And when could these scenarios happen? And how do we plan for and adapt to them? The potential climate change impacts to infrastructure, wastewater systems such as the central wastewater treatment plant, pump stations, and gravity conveyances, surface water infrastructure that is tidally influenced, such as pump stations, Puyallup River levees, transportation infrastructure. These are all examples of potential infrastructure that could be impacted by climate change, such impacts as a result of climate change, such as sea level rise. And then we also have natural systems that could be affected, such as marine ecosystems and intertidal habitats, as well as the Puyallup River. Key findings for the climate change topic is that climate vulnerability is low to moderate over a 20-year planning horizon for most resources in the Tideflats. Wastewater infrastructure has the highest hazard vulnerability associated with the central wastewater treatment plant, and the city of Tacoma has mitigated this risk by constructing a flood wall at the facility. Projected impacts over a 20-year planning horizon are primarily driven by increased flood projections during extreme flood events, leading to temporary flooding of roadways, rail, and development in low-lying areas.
Thank you, Deirdre. Now we are going to move on to hear more from our panelists. What I would like to hear from each of you is first a response to the question, with respect to the environment and health, what is the biggest opportunity in the Tideflats? And what do you see as a significant barrier to achieving that opportunity? And I'm going to ask Melissa if she would like to start.
I think with, you know, the idea that every crisis presents an opportunity is something that I kind of hold on to. The climate crisis is huge in front of us, and I don't think, I think one of the good things about this process is that we're talking about it more, but I haven't heard a lot of, I think, realistic talk about the threat that climate change poses. You know, scientists say that we're supposed to cut all emissions by 2050 and cut about 50% of our emissions by 2030 if we're going to stay on track to avoid the worst catastrophes of climate change. And everyone knows with deadlines, like you need to build in cushion for that. And we're not talking about that at the city. We're not talking about that at the port. And I think it's really sad because I think that the stuff that it will take to meet emissions reduction and what that can mean for our community and health and environment is huge. Like, there's huge shipping companies that are going to have emissions-free ships by 2030. If we were trying to become an innovation hub and clean energy manufacturing hub, we could capture some of the just opportunity that's in that. That would be transformative for our community. And so we, you know, I think with that type of work and with pushing for innovation and clean industry and embracing the healthy environment around here more, we don't have to pick jobs versus environment. We can have both. We can have, you know, good jobs. We could have a secure and thriving community, and we can have a healthy and thriving and vital environment.
Thank you. Shar, would you care to take that question next? So
Absolutely.
What's the biggest opportunity and what you see as a barrier to that?
I think the biggest opportunity, I totally agree with Melissa. I think it was really well said about, I don't think it's an either or dialogue or discussion between jobs versus environment. I think we can have both. And I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that a new normal is kind of required. And I kind of put that task and a goal to the port and the tribe and Citizens for a Healthy Bay and the Northeast Tacoma residents and industry and business within the port that we need to do better. You know, the port is that whole area is located within the reservation. And what that really means is, I mean, the tribe is a fishery-based tribe. And if they lose their fishery, then they've lost their identity. I mean, they're intricately linked to who they are. And something that's very different between tribes and non-tribal folks is that most of the Puyallup Nation and membership live on or near the reservation. It doesn't matter whether the environment is pristine or if it's completely degraded, they do not move. That is their homeland. It's unlike me as a non-member. I've moved around several times in my life, have several different homes, but it's important to remember that their homeland is there and generations upon generations will stay there. And we are only kind of slowing down extinction by a nanosecond. And so what we need to do is move the chain. We need to improve the environmental baseline. That means moving into this next century in terms of reducing air emissions through cleaner technologies, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, continuing our trajectory in restoration and improving water quality. Again, you know that the tribe eats a lot more than the average American on shellfish and salmon, and yet they still can only fish a few hours for a given season for a given type of salmon because of toxics and pollutants and closure of our shellfish beds. So I guess there is a lot of room to improve. We have moved the chain, but there's still quite a ways to go. Thank you.
Jason. And again, the opportunity of the Tideflats and the barrier to achieving it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So following up with Shar and Melissa's comments, I think, you know, climate is obviously top of mind. I really liked Deirdre's presentation. There was a slide set there that showed the human hair and the diesel particulate micron. So since 2008, the Port of Tacoma has been part of the Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy, and we've reduced that diesel particulate by 80% of our operations, which is really, really exciting and great, but there's a lot more to do. And similarly with greenhouse gases, since 2005, we've reduced our greenhouse gases at the Port of Tacoma by 20%, but there's a lot more to do. So our commission has boldly taken on the Paris Climate Accords. And so to Melissa's point, we're working very, very hard to develop strategies where we get to zero emissions by 2050, if not sooner. So things like shore power, things like reducing diesel particulate in our cargo handling equipment, working really, really aggressively. Absolutely right. It's critically important. Time is of the essence, and quite frankly, we're running out of time. Like that, and the other things that Shar mentioned, fisheries habitat. You know, we really believe that that's a key nexus to how we can operate our port and still protect salmon. We've really focused our mitigation strategy around salmon habitat improvements, particularly around juvenile salmon habitat. We've developed over 200 acres, and we've got some really great properties and examples where we've done that. Water quality, another really important thing. Most of our tenants are governed not only by the municipal stormwater permit, but also by an industrial stormwater general permit, which has very low benchmarks. So we have to come up with creative, cost-effective treatment solutions, and I'm pleased to report that our facilities are doing that. And we believe that the water that's coming off our terminals is actually cleaner than when it came onto our terminals. So that's really exciting. But there's still so much more to do. The barrier, from my perspective, is dollars. I mean, it all comes down to resources. We, as a Port Authority, have some resources, which is fantastic, but we certainly don't have enough resources to do it all. So partnering with folks like the Puyallup tribe and partnering with the state, leveraging federal dollars, that'll really help us bring some more of these really positive initiatives to the Tideflats. As an example, I mentioned shore power. We've received over $4 million in federal, state, and local grant funding on a $9 million project. That makes it really cost effective for us to go out and install shore power at our facilities. That's what's going to be really important, and that's a barrier for us from an implementation perspective.
Very good. Thank you. What I would like to do is ask if Deborah and Radhika could help us with some questions from the audience.
Hi, Marcy. I'm going to share this this question, and I invite the panelists to answer. And what kinds of actions should we prioritize to protect the natural environment and reduce potential impacts?
Who would like to take that question first? Though we'd like to hear from all of you. Do you want to repeat it one more time, Radhika?
Sure. What kinds of actions should be prioritized to protect the natural environment and reduce potential impacts? And I'll put the question in the chat as well.
I'm happy to jump in unless the panel wants. Shar, did I cut you off? Sorry.
No, please go ahead, Jason, and
Okay.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's a good question. It's a tough question. So we've talked about some of the things that are important, whether it be around reducing greenhouse gases, reducing diesel particulate, improving water quality, developing habitat for juvenile salmon and our other species. We're working on a quiet, we're calling it quiet sound, which is a way that we can work with the vessels that call to our harbors in both in Seattle and Tacoma to look for ways where they can reduce their engine noise so that, you know, the orcas can hunt for salmon. So there's just a lot of opportunity, you know, whether it's natural resources or whether it's operational. And for us, we look at it kind of land, water, air, if you will, and we look to our partners, we look to the community to help us prioritize. We looked for win-win situations where, as an example, we can bring in development opportunities and we can clean up contaminated property. That's a real win-win where that development will help pay for the cost of cleaning up that contaminated property. There's a lot to do. We're blessed with a really proactive commission. They're our policymakers, they're the elected body, and we as a staff bring ideas to them and they help us prioritize it. Deirdre mentioned a strategic plan. The Port of Tacoma is just in the process of finalizing a strategic plan that helps outline those key initiatives and helps outline the implementation plan associated with that. So really rely on our electeds and our external stakeholders to help us prioritize.
Thank you. Shar, did you have something to add as well?
Yes, thank you. You know, I was just going to say I'm a real shovel in the ground kind of gal. And even though I think there's definitely a place for plans, that I think what's really important is that we kind of leverage our resources across institutions and come together. Jason was talking about, you know, that we need more money. And I think the way to do that is leverage relationships across the county, of course, across the port. And that's kind of how we get things done at the tribe in terms of working with our partners from design of projects to implementation and construction of projects. And then it can happen much faster. For instance, I'm all about like a capital facilities plan for stormwater infrastructure so that we start looking at stormwater retrofit projects within the port, across the port, and the leases as well, so that we actually look at some of the toxics that are being discharged into the waters and really come up with novel solutions. And so that's what I'm about, is really kind of prioritizing projects that we can design sooner than later and finding creative ways to get them funded. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Melissa, did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, I will just add, you know, the way that things happen under our regulatory system is that we set, and I'm going to reference the Clean Water Act, we set long-term goals, you know, and when the Clean Water Act was passed, rivers were on fire. And you set long-term goals of having clean, fishable, swimmable water, and you set sub-goals nearer and nearer. And what you do is you set standards of what people have to do to make it so that we can all get to those goals over time. And when you put those standards in place, industry innovates and creates new technology to allow them to do it. And so if you don't uphold those laws and you don't keep making better standards, that law doesn't work anymore. And I think that, you know, whether we're talking about habitat or clean water or clean air, we have to have, it's one thing to want to have an innovation and technology to get us there, but that's not going to happen if there's not upholding the laws. And so I think one of the really important things is that we have to uphold the laws that are in place and the standards that are in place. And then we have to create goals and new standards for where we want to be and push for technology and create the opportunity for that technology to thrive.
Now, do any of our panelists have thoughts about what they've heard from one of the other panelists? Any observations?
I'll chime in real quick. Thanks again for the opportunity. Following up with Melissa, you know, regulations absolutely drives industry, and that's certainly a really good tool. From a port perspective, because we're a discretionary port, which means our cargo doesn't have to come here. Most of our cargo is headed back east. We are also looking at it from not only an environmental stewardship, which is definitely top of mind for our executives and commission, but also from a competitiveness perspective. So in other words, if Washington State is has more regulatory constraints, or the cost of doing business is more in Washington State compared to Vancouver, BC, as an example, that's an issue. So for us, we are very engaged at a national level to make sure that it's an even playing field within the United States, and then also at an international level. So that, you know, our international competitors like Vancouver, BC, or Prince Rupert in Canada up farther north have similar standards. Just throw that out there for the group's consideration. It's from a port perspective, it's important from both perspectives.
Thank you. Radhika, do you have other questions for the panel?
Yeah, one other question that's come up is whether the panelists can share a bit about what is valuable about the natural resources in the Tideflats.
I'm going to ask Shar if she would start the response to that question. I believe you're muted, Shar.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. I was going to say, I think the uniqueness, I mean, there are so many different uses within the port. I mean, we have the residences in Northeast Tacoma. We have the manufacturing industrial heart of the port. We have habitat restoration properties. There are so many uses, and I think what's really cool is that there's so much opportunity for us together to work together. And I think that's what's really unique to me, is that we are moving the environmental baseline. You know, 20 years ago, beyond 20 years ago, when I started the tribe, it was really the heart of hazardous waste in terms of hazardous waste sites at the port. And there's been a lot of cleanup over the last 20 years, but there's a lot more to do. And I think with that, just in having these discussions are building the relationships and building a trust level for us to move forward in terms of, let's improve on those 200 acres of restoration and habitat sites within the port area. There's a lot more opportunity there for restoration and enhancements of the nearshore area. we would love to be a part of that solution there. And I guess I'll just stop at that for the moment.
Great, thank you. Melissa, would you like to add your thoughts?
Can you answer the question one more time?
Radhika?
Yeah, the question is, what is valuable about the natural resources in the Tideflats?
This is such a unique area. You know, I moved here from Wisconsin in 2015, and I had been out here for a year in college and just could not get the idea of mountains and ocean out of my head. And moving to Tacoma and getting to know the environment here has been overwhelming. It's amazing to go tide pooling. It's amazing to live next to such deep water. This is an incredibly unique place to live, and the Puget Sound and Salish Sea has some of the most biodiversity in the world. It's so valuable, and I think that wherever you look in the world, when the environment gets degraded, it hurts the community. The community suffers. We are all connected, and our ability to survive and thrive in the face of climate change is going to absolutely depend on how resilient our environment is. And so I think that we have to step it up and get really, really serious about protecting our environment and kind of revolutionizing how we view, how we take care of it.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Yeah, it's a really cool question. I mean, the simple answer for me is everything. It's a cliche, but this is a great place. It's a beautiful place to work, live, and play. It's amazing. You can see over my head Mount Rainier, and Deirdre's picture, I think, in one of the slide sets was, you know, the port with Mount Rainier really popping. You know, from a natural resource perspective, whether it's our salmon that's so important to this area, our resident killer whales, so important to this area. It's really a part of our identity. You know, to deep water, I really appreciate Melissa saying that. You know, we're naturally blessed with deep water. So from a port perspective, that's a great thing because we're not constantly dredging to keep our waterways deep. We're also blessed geographically. We're blessed to be near Eastern Washington with all the wheat, Idaho with potatoes. We export a lot of natural products, and so our location is really well suited for that. We're close proximity with Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then when you look at the where most of the cargo is coming from Asia, because of our location, we're blessed to be in our location because it's a quicker voyage to the Pacific Northwest, which means, by the way, reduced diesel particulate and reduced greenhouse gases because it takes less fuel to get here. So it's really everything. And I think the trick for us as leaders in our community and people that deeply care about this place is, how do we balance it all? How do we balance great jobs, green jobs, with a thriving port, a thriving place where people want to live? It's certainly achievable and doable, but there's a lot of work ahead of us to not only keep it where it is now, but to grow it and make it even more attractive.
Great, thank you. I am going to move us along to the next question. And this question is, with respect to environment and health, how does the Tideflats look and function 20 years from now? So looking into the future, what would it look like? And I am going to turn to Shar first this time.
Looking into the future, I'd really like to see significant improvement in terms of acreage of habitat restored, softening of our nearshore areas, and not as much, not the flood walls and the hard structures. I'd really like to see some improvement in terms of reduction of toxics in being discharged into our air shed. for not just the tribal membership, but also Northeast Tacoma residents. No encroachment in terms of the residential buffer along the slope of that Northeast Tacoma area. I think that it really serves as a great green space in terms of noise and pollution reduction. And I think that's fantastic. Let's see what else. I would also really like to see kind of moving the chain again in terms of modernization, in terms of kind of moving towards more sustainable fuels like hydrogen power, for instance, moving away from the reliance on fossil fuels and the externalities and pollution associated with fossil fuels. And also, I would really like to see some creative ways to improve reductions of toxics in stormwater across the port. And I think the possibility for innovation is there. It is expensive, but I think, like Melissa was saying, I think we do need to move the chain in terms of resetting our goals a little bit. And if this pandemic has taught us anything, that we really need to look at kind of the world through a new lens now, and that includes natural resources. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jason, I'm gonna turn to you next.
Great. Well, Shar stole a lot of my thunder. So good job, Shar. No, it's, from a relationship perspective, 20 years from now, I hope that the port, the city, and the Puyallup Tribe of Indians are working hand in hand. I would love for us to continue to grow and improve those relationships, whether that be as neighbors, as good stewards of the environment, or even business partners, if that's a possibility. We have so much to offer, and to the panel's point, working together, we can really advance the ball. For me, it's a lot more of the great work that we're doing. We could talk about cleaning up legacy contamination in the Tideflats. We've done much of that. In fact, we've leveraged over $300 million, if you can believe that, cleaning up contaminated properties in Commencement Bay. But there's more to do. There's absolutely more to do. And there's some big ones out there that many of the folks on this panel know about. Stormwater improvements, water quality improvements. We are on the cutting edge, but we can push that envelope farther. The big one though, for me, is about electrification. For us, it's really, if we're going to achieve our goals of getting to zero by 2050, it's really being strategic and smart about how we invest in electrical infrastructure, because that's going to be a requirement in order to facilitate that reduction in emissions. So electrification, electrification, electrification. The good news is that we're there in terms of working closely with Tacoma Public Utilities. The bad news is that it's very expensive. It's very expensive, and we have to be very thoughtful about it, because it's major infrastructure that, if we don't do it right, won't be located in places that work for our port authority and our customers. But so those are kind of some of the things that I'm hoping for 20 years from now, or even sooner.
Great, thank you. Melissa.
Yeah, I really like this question about this vision for the future, because I've been thinking a lot about that lately. Especially because this 2030 deadline is looming for that 50% reduction in emissions. And if I think about what it's going to take for us to get there, if we do that, we will have a very different look and feel to this community. One of the comparable port cities, I think, out there is Copenhagen. And what they did was they kind of revolutionized how they structured their port. They made it more publicly accessible. They attracted more innovative industry. They changed it so that you can actually swim in the water of the port of Copenhagen. And there's wildlife. It's a thriving area, and it's helped the city in a tremendous way. And so I think about like, what would that look like here? If we were a little bit more intentional about how we structure things, I think that we could have restored habitat areas, and you could have people take their kids down to the waterfront and see salmon coming back from the ocean and going up the stream to spawn. You could come back a couple months later and see, you know, little salmon fry going out through these eelgrass beds out to the ocean and just kind of wonder, is that the child of the salmon that I saw earlier? I think that type of, that experience will require change in our community, but it will also create change in our community. It will affect the children that see that. It will affect our families. It will affect all of us. And so that vision that I have for the Tideflats is for something that's different than where we're headed right now, and would be cleaner and healthier for everyone. I think that we'd have very innovative industry. Clean fuels, I think, has to be a big part of that. And yeah.
A big goal.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to turn to Radhika again and see if she has any questions from our audience.
This is mostly a question for Jason. And we've had a couple of questions from the audience asking whether the information that you talked about regarding air and water quality is available to the public, and whether it's available on the Port website.
The short answer is yes. Is it available the way I'd love for it to be? Not necessarily, but certainly like our Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy, our emissions inventory, that's all available on both the Port of Tacoma and the Northwest Seaport Alliance website. Some of our innovative stormwater treatment technologies is certainly available. I'm trying to think what else. Some of the remediation projects. We have a graphic on our website that's our commitment to Commencement Bay that outlines those program areas. And you can always reach out to me. My biggest beef with the Port of Tacoma, and I'm partly to blame for this, is that we do this amazing work, but we're not really good at telling our story. And I know our new executive, well, he's not new anymore. He's been here for a little over a year now. Executive Director Eric Johnson is working really hard with our communications team and with my team to figure out how we tell our story better. We're developing a new website, all that sort of stuff, but happy to share that. We do a lot of public outreach. We have a port biologist that will literally pre-COVID take you on a tour to show you some of our great habitat sites and things like that. So please feel free to reach out directly to me if you can't find it. But generally speaking, most of that information is there.
Great, thanks. Radhika, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, this one is about what might stop us from reaching our carbon emission goals in viable salmon fisheries. And I know some of you talked about the barriers already, but if you could add some more, that would be great.
Yeah, I would, all talk and no action is going to make it so we don't reach these emissions goals. And there have been plenty of plans out there that nothing has happened on. And so I don't want to see that happen again. We have to be serious about this and set clear goals that will get us there, put like buffers in so we can actually achieve it, and then actually do it. One of the things that's been frustrating about clean air plans around here is with the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle is that there was a clean air plan for addressing emissions from drayage trucks. And the Port of Seattle met it, and the Port of Tacoma didn't. And I don't want to see us be a place where we don't follow through on plans. And I know that Jason works really hard. I think we have to make sure that we keep stepping up and step up to these plans. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I think this vision is so important, because we have to come together and decide what we're going to look like in the future and what we want. And if we work together, we can bring innovation and make that happen.
If I could just chime in real quick, Melissa's
Please.
absolutely right. I would say it slightly differently. We did meet our clean truck program, but Seattle was 2 years ahead of us. So we committed to a time frame and didn't meet the initial time frame. But now all of our all of our international facilities in both harbors have a 2007 clean truck standard, which, by the way, has been extremely successful. Just so for folks, for comparison, a 2006 engineer truck compared to a 2007 engineer truck, there's about a 90% reduction in diesel particulate when you go from 6 to 7 engineer. So it's really significant. But Melissa's absolutely right. One of the lessons learned in that example, and it's certainly something that I won't forget, is making sure we're clear with our policymakers, whether goals are aspirational or set in stone. Prior to the formation of the Seaport Alliance, as an example, Seattle did not take those as aspirational, whereas Tacoma did. With the formation of the Seaport Alliance, it was very clear that we had to sync up and be similar in both gateways. But a valuable lesson to be learned, and I would share that with anyone, in that be very clear with your stakeholders, whether those are the policymakers or the community, so that those expectations are well understood and can be achieved, to Melissa's point.
Great. Do you want to mention, Jason, just a little about the Northwest Seaport Alliance? It's been mentioned several times.
Yeah.
So I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. You know, we've been living and breathing it now for, I don't know, 5 years or so. And so I kind of forget. And sometimes people will look at me and like, well, what is that? So yes, good question. So the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle have historically competed for cargo and other maritime uses. And our commissions about 7 years ago now got together and said, you know what, let's quit competing. Let's figure out a way where we can work together. And so this was a really bold action on the commission's part. And they essentially said, okay, we're going to take the cargo operations in Tacoma and the cargo operations in Seattle and create a new entity called the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And so the Northwest Seaport Alliance is really focused on bringing cargo into our gateway, international domestic cargo. So in Seattle, that was a big part of their book of business, but not nearly as big as it was in Tacoma. You can imagine that the Port of Seattle also runs the SeaTac Airport, as an example. They have a fishing fleet, they have crews. So it made up about 40% of the Port of Seattle's book of business at the time. In Tacoma, containers were a much larger chunk of the Port of Tacoma's operations. And so that made up about 80% of the Port of Tacoma's operations. So big focus. The former CEO for the Port of Tacoma, John Wolf, now is the CEO for the Seaport Alliance. I wear two hats. I represent, I'm the environmental director, planning director for both the Seaport Alliance and for the Port of Tacoma, which is really great because I can, there's a lot of synergy there. There's a lot of overlap. And then Eric Johnson is our new executive director for the Port of Tacoma. What's great about Eric coming on board is he can really focus on not only supporting the Seaport Alliance, which is key, but also growing the Port of Tacoma book of business, whether that be warehousing or whatever the commission might want him to expand in. So anyway, long story short, the commissions got together and so formed the Seaport Alliance. And now John Wolf, instead of having 5 bosses, 5 Port of Tacoma commissioners, he has 10 bosses, 5 from Tacoma and 5 from Seattle.
Good. But it sounds like the coordination is beneficial from both ports' perspectives, and hopefully for some of those goals, improving health and the environment as well. Shar, did you have something else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple of things to what Melissa said. For me, it's really all about plan implementation and project implementation, which I kind of touched upon earlier. But For instance, a good example of this is there's a tributary that runs through the town of South Prairie called South Prairie Creek, and it's kind of the breadbasket for salmon production in all of the Puyallup River watershed in terms of salmon rearing and spawning. It's one of our greatest tributaries for spawning and rearing. And we just recently completed a huge habitat project where we reconnected over half a mile of the old historic oxbow through over about an 80-acre site. But the problem was that this project took 20 years to get in the ground between property acquisition, permitting, and then getting the resources, the money. And there were all kinds of folks involved from the tribe, the county, South Salmon Enhancement Group. Many folks were involved in this, and we would never have been able to do it if we hadn't leveraged all the resources of all of these folks. And we had decided early on that we were going to put together a Cadillac habitat project, but that it was going to cost a lot of money. But it brings me to tears when I think about that being our most, or one of our most highest producing spawning and rearing tributaries in all of our watershed, and it took 20 years to get in the ground. So we need to do better, you guys, in terms of plan implementation. You know, I'm from Chicago, and so when I got here many, many years ago, one of the first things I recognized was that in my view, that Washington State was really heavy on plans and short on implementation. And I guess I'll go there and say that is that we've really run out of time in terms of salmon recovery. We don't have any more time, folks, and we need to do a much better job at getting these projects in the ground now. So to the extent that we can work together, and I mean that sincerely, is that it's all about trusting one another and getting some of these projects in the ground. And we might have different goals, but there's a lot more that binds us together and similarities than what brings us apart. So I say that we need to find those things, and we need to leverage our resources. And we have a lot of ability to do that at the tribe. So rely on us, and we'll extend our hand to you guys as well. So thank you.
Very good. I think those are perfect closing thoughts. I want to thank our three panelists very much for providing their views and knowledge for the group tonight. And I am now going to turn the meeting back to Deirdre briefly to tell you what's coming up.
Thanks, Marcy. That was a lot of good information and conversation. If you have not had a chance to have your question answered, I believe that we will be following up with answers to those questions, and you also have the opportunity to take the online survey, which will be available until April 30th. And all of the information related to the sub-area planning process is located on the city's website at that address there, but it comes up easily if you Google Tideflats sub-area plan. The first thing that comes up will be the city's website. We do have another visioning panel session on Saturday. I believe that's at noon, and that's on transportation and infrastructure, and then a community meeting to talk about the results of our visioning on May 6th.
Thank you very much. So to repeat again, Deirdre is correct. We will respond to questions, and those will go up on the website, those that we were not able to answer during our time frame this evening. Please do take the survey. We'd love to have you join us for Saturday's session as well. And also, all the sessions will be posted to the website as well. So you'll have a chance to hear the panelists in that opportunity as well. So again, thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you very much to our panel.